Hi everyone, it's Kira Garfola with Greenville Tech's Math 155. Today we're going to talk about section 1.1, which is operations on the scientific calculator. The good news is a lot of this will be a review for most of you. However, some of you haven't done this with our TI-30 multi-view that's required for the class. There can be a little bit of a learning curve here, so definitely get some practice. This calculator will be your best friend through the rest of this class. So in this section, we're going to start by talking about the order of operations, and then we're going to talk about basic calculations on our calculators. We're going to do basic arithmetic. We're going to talk about parentheses, exponents, negatives, square roots, and scientific notation. We're going to specifically focus on understanding scientific notation versus ordinary notation. We'll have a few sections throughout the rest of our course where scientific notation is very helpful. And again, a lot of you have probably seen most of this somewhere, so enjoy an easy start. Most of my students say that Unit 1, for the most part, is an easy start, so don't get lulled into complacency, but certainly brush off the dust, kind of get those skills clean and ready to go for the rest of the course. So, the order of operations. So in math, our order of operations just basically is a set of instructions for how to solve each problem. Many of you are familiar with PEMDAS. We do parentheses first, then exponents, then we do multiplication and division. And remember, that's important that it goes from left to right. Then we do addition and subtraction. Again, those go from left to right. So if you see division before multiplication, that's fine. Go ahead and divide. One good mnemonic device for PEMDAS is please excuse my dear Aunt Sally. I never really got into that mnemonic. PEMDAS was just a word that stuck out in my mind, but I know that that works for a lot of you. So whatever works, right? Today, we're going to do a lot of order of operations, but it'll also be important through the rest of our course. I really cringe when I'm grading Unit 3 tests and somebody got all of the actual understanding of the new stuff correct, but they messed up the order of operations and it gave them a very wrong answer. I always hate taking points for those. The good news is our calculators will do a lot of the order of operations for us. We just have to be very careful how we input things, but it's also very important to understand that order of operations. So again, our calculators are smart. They're usually smarter than we are, okay? So if you were to simply type in 2 plus 3 times 5, it's going to do that 3 times 5 first, and then it's going to add it to 2. If you want to do the addition first, then you have to put it somewhere else in PEMDAS, right? You've got to get it before that multiplication. So you're going to use parentheses. You can put parentheses around 2 plus 5 and then multiply times 3. Remember that X or times is typically an asterisk in the calculator. So if we look at what our calculator looks like, see if I can make this any bigger. This is why I'm staying out of present mode, by the way, in PowerPoint. Okay, so if we simply type 2 plus 3 times 5 and press enter, that's going to give us that 17 that we saw. But if we want to do that 2 plus 3 first, our parentheses are right here on the calculator. So we'll put 2 plus 3 in parentheses. Oops. Times 5. And that's going to give us an entirely different answer. It's going to give us 25. Sorry, guys, this emulator is very different. The actual calculator is much easier to use and faster. So again, just make sure that you pay attention because that order of operations will bite you. These are two very different answers on a test, right? Okay, let's look at some examples here. If we want to have 3 times 12 minus 28 divided by 4 with no parentheses, we can just enter that directly into our calculator. We can say 3 times 12 minus 28 divided by 4. Now you should be able to do this in your head, right? 3 times 12 is going to be first. So we're going to have 36 minus, and then that 28 divided by 4 groups together, which is going to be 7. Okay. Should give us 29 if we do a little bit of mental math. But if you can't do mental math that quickly, don't worry. Use your calculator. Sure enough, it gives us 29. Now, these are the same numbers. And if we do it differently, right? We say 3 times, and then we introduce parentheses to 12 minus 28. And then we divide by 4. It's going to be negative 12. That's going to be a very different answer, right? We can then go again. We can use double parentheses if we want. That says, hey, we're doing the 12 minus 28 very first. Then we're going to divide by 4. And then we'll be multiplying all of that by 3 because parentheses have closed. And we get negative 12 again. For the other ones, let's see if I can make this work on this computer. Now we have everything in parentheses until the divide by 4. So we open our parentheses, say 3 times 12 minus 28. Now it's going to apply the PEMDAS in there. It's going to do 3 times 12 first and then subtract 28. Then it's going to divide by 4. That's going to give us 2. And lastly, we can have parentheses 3 times, open parentheses again, 12 minus 28. And divide that by 4. And look at that, we got negative 12 again. So all of these were with the same exact numbers, just changing that order of operations around. Now I do want to show you that if you forget to close, let's say 12 minus 3 plus 8 minus 6, and we just close one parenthesis. We didn't actually close this one. You're gonna kind of confuse it, okay? Always make sure that if you have 2 open parentheses, you have 2 closed parentheses, because it might not be doing exactly what you want it to do. So just be careful with your parentheses. In certain things, it'll also give you an error there. So if you get an error, certainly check your parentheses, check your negatives. But definitely take care not to miss any parentheses. Okay. Now, we have to be really careful with division here. If we have 3 plus 9 in our numerator and 10 plus 2 in our denominator, then that's pretty easy to see by hand that we have 12 on the top and 12 on the bottom, so we're going to get 1. In parentheses, though, make sure, in the calculator, excuse me, be sure you use parentheses. Put your entire numerator on top and divide by your entire numerator on the bottom, okay? So in our calculator, we can say, okay, we want parentheses 3 plus 9, and then divide it by parentheses 10 plus 2. Close the parentheses. Now, if your calculator is in math print, which to get to math print, you can go to mode right here and scroll down to right here and make sure that math print is highlighted. Then you can also use this other little button here. This N over D button will set up a fraction for you. And then you don't have to use your parentheses as much. You can say 3 plus 9 and then use this little bottom button to say, move me to the bottom and say 10 plus 2. So it's really a matter of preference. It's going to do the exact same thing. Sometimes one way is prettier than the other. And there's the typo. Okay. Now, when you're in this, your resulting answers will be in fraction form instead of decimals. Okay. If we did 3 on the top and on the bottom, we did 2 plus 3. You could press enter and see that's going to give us 3/5 instead of decimals. If we press this little arrow here, that's going to move us between fraction and decimal. So a lot of using your calculator here is just exploration. So go ahead and give this one a try. If you need to pause it for a second, that's a great idea. And I'll work it out now. So we certainly, in this case, instead of getting lost in parentheses, I really like to use the math print. And then you're just typing it in once you're in math print. It's going to be 1.24 plus 5.73 times 4.61. And you're going to move to the bottom. And you're going to have 3.49. Oops. Didn't click there. You're going to have 3.49. You're going to open parentheses. And have 1.58 plus 3.27. Close your parentheses. Press enter. And you should get somewhere around 1.634. If you were not able to get that, definitely work until you can. You can go back in the video, whatever you need to do, because you will see problems like this on the test. Okay, let's move along. Let's talk about some special properties of 0. So remember that 0 is kind of a weird number, right? It has a lot of self properties. So you can add and subtract 0 to any number and it has no effect. You can multiply any number by 0 and it's going to give you 0. Any 0 divided by any number will give you 0. Okay. So 0 divided by 1,000,000 is still 0. Think about if you have no candy bars, it doesn't matter if you're dividing it between one person or 2 people or 2,000 people. Nobody's getting any candy bar because there was nothing to begin with. Now, the trick with 0 is we cannot have 0 on the bottom. Okay. So in our denominator, we cannot have 0. If we have 5 over 0, if we have 1 over 0, if we have 0 over 0, it's undefined every time. So keep that in mind. Your calculator will usually give you an error if you end up with something undefined. Another very important thing in our calculator is that you must be careful with your negatives. If you want to do subtraction, you use this button right here for subtraction. If you want to tell it is a -2 or a negative whatever number, you must use this little negative in parentheses down here at the bottom by enter. If you reverse those, you'll either get the wrong answer or more likely you will get an error where you put that minus in front of a number. Remember to refresh on the rules of negatives in arithmetic. Negative times a negative is going to be a positive. Negative times a positive is a negative. Adding and subtracting negatives, keep those in mind as we go. Use your calculator if you're not sure. Now, if we want to use exponents in our calculator, we can use the caret. We call this little caret, this little arrow key. And that is going to be the easiest way to use exponents in our calculator. So if we clear this out, the caret on the TI-30 multi-view is over here on the left in the middle. So if we want to have 4 to the third, we'll press 4 caret 3 and press enter. And it'll give us 64. Now, something cool about negative exponents is that they take the reciprocal. Okay, so reciprocal, you're going to flip the fraction. So 4 to the -3rd is the same thing as 1 over 4 to the 3rd, which we can see is 1 over 64 or 0.016. We can do this in the calculator any of these ways and get that answer. If you're careful with your negative, you can just say, hey, I want you to give me 4 to the, remember we use this negative button here, -3, and you're going to get 1 out of 64. If you want the decimal, remember we're going to hit this back and forth arrow, and it'll give us that 0.016 roughly. Okay. Any time that we take any number raised to the 0th power, it's going to be 1. Our calculator can check that for us, but if you see that, you'll save some time typing that in, okay? If you have 1,000,000.2 to the 0 power, it will be 1. 0 to the 0th is undefined. I'll spare you the mathematical theory there, but it goes back to multiplication and division, and you end up dividing by 0 again. So 0 to the 0 is undefined. We won't see that much, if at all, in this class. Now, sometimes we use special verbiage instead of saying to the second or to the third. There's nothing mathematically wrong with that. But generally, if we see to the second power, it is something squared. And if we raise it to the third power, we say it is cubed. Okay, there's actually a special button on our calculators for x squared, and it's this button right here. So if you say you want 6 squared, you can press 6, press this little x squared button, press enter, and it'll do 36 for you. It doesn't change anything. You could use the caret and go to 2. It's really a personal preference, which one you think is faster and simpler. Now, be very careful with negatives and exponents. And I don't just mean negative exponents. Okay, we already kind of talked about that. But negative exponents or negative numbers with exponents can get really tricky. Be very careful to use parentheses when necessary. -2 with the negative outside here to the 4th is not the same as parentheses around that -2 to the 4th. Remember the order of operations. Negative in front is the same thing as saying -1 times. Okay, we just kind of drop that 1. This would do your 2 to the 4th first and then make the whole thing negative. But -2 to the 4th is -2 times -2 times -2 times -2, which -4 times is going to give us a positive. So just be very careful, be very cognizant of where you're putting your exponents. This is where practice makes perfect. Make sure you're practicing these problems. Even exponents are where this causes an issue. Odds tend to keep their negatives if they're negative. But if you have an even exponent, you can get in trouble. Okay, so take a few minutes and let's practice these. If you need to pause, go ahead. If we just have -11 to the 3rd like this, just simply type it, -11 caret 3 is going to give us -1331. Now, if we have parentheses, -11 to the 3rd, that's my negative with this horrible keyboard. I'm going to tell it to insert. And press enter. It's going to still give us that -1331. Now, if this had been an even exponent, like 2, 4, 6, etc., then our signs would be opposite here. But since it's odd, remember, even exponents are the problem. So if we look here at -11 in parentheses again to the 4th, we're going to get a positive number. Okay, if you can try that again without the parentheses, it's going to give you the negative version of that. If we want to add some steps here, we don't just have to do the exponents. We can say, okay, well, I want 2 to the 4th. Press this arrow over here to get down from that exponent. Minus 4 to the 4th. You get -240. And then notice that that is not the same as parentheses 2 minus 4 to the 4th. It's going to give us a very different answer. We have a 16. So just be very careful with your order of operations and entering things into calculators. Now let's talk about scientific notation, which is hopefully a review for most of you. we have a really big or a really, really small number, it's easiest to write these in scientific notation. It saves us writing a whole bunch of zeros, okay? You're going to have a number between 1 and 10, and you're going to multiply it times 10 to some power, okay? If you have a positive exponent for 10, you're going to move the decimal right. If you have a negative exponent of 10, you're going to move the decimal left. So if it's positive, you're going to move that decimal in the pot and towards the bigger numbers. Negative, you're going to move it towards smaller numbers. So for example, we have this number here. We can write this as 3.8 times 10 to the 9th. I always like to look and see, well, where's my first digit? 3.8 is between 1 and 10, right? And then I just say 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Play that leapfrog. How many times do you have to move that decimal? Same thing applies here. Figure out where your number between 1 and 10 is and play leapfrog backwards. Since we're going smaller number, we're going to have negative exponent. Now, in the calculator, it sometimes does us a solid. If it's a really big or really small number, it's going to give it to us in scientific, no matter what, okay? You can force your calculator to give you answers in scientific notation by going back to this mode option. You see where it says norm in that second line? If we go down and go over to scientific and press enter, and then we press second quit, it'll give us anything that we want in scientific notation. So if I want 1,269 in scientific notation, I can just type that number and press enter, and it's going to give it to us in scientific notation. Hopefully everybody's watching this. That's going to save you a lot of time on a test at some point. Calculator can do it for us. You can verify that, right? We're going to move decimal 3 places over here. Now you don't want to be stuck in this, so you need to go right back. Not second. You need to go right back to mode. Scroll down, and you want it to be on normal. So scroll down, highlight normal, make sure that's flashing, and you can go back to quit. Okay? Now if we type 1269 and press enter, it's just going to say, hey, it's 1269. You can save a lot of time in our calculator also by using that times 10 to the n button here instead of typing. If we want 2.5 times 10 to the 3, for example, we could certainly just type it like that, right? But we can also say 2.5 and then use this button right here, that times 10 to the n, and that'll save us that times 10 piece. Okay. Again, preference, shortcuts, it's all doing the same thing. Now, let's take a look at this. You could certainly put this in your calculator. Be super careful. Make sure you don't drop any zeros here, okay? And it'll spit it out for us. We can do this by hand too. 2.3 is our number between 1 and 10. So we have 2.3. So we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16. So we're going to have 2.3 times 10 to the 16. Okay. I'll type that here for you. Okay. Now, if we want to change 8.2 times 10 to the 5th times to standard notation, I'm really struggling with this keyboard. It's not my normal computer. Then remember that we're going to start with 8.2, but then we need to move back 5 decimal spots. So we'll go here, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and that's going to leave us with 4 zeros and then 8.2. I missed a 0. Can't talk and write at the same time, apparently. So it's a good idea to double check, right? We went 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 places. Same thing here. We're going to move it 3 decimal places, but we're going to the bigger side because it's positive. So 1, 2, 3, and this is just going to give us 3726. So 3,726. Okay. Definitely make sure that you are familiar with this. Now, if we want to put this in scientific notation, unless we're rounding, really, it looks complicated, but it's quite easy. We want all the same numbers. We don't want to cut any of them off. So between 1 and 10, you're going to go to 2.3874893.8, and then that's going to be times 10 to the, well, how did we get over here? We were 2.3 and we went 1, 2, 3 backwards. So it's going to be times 10 to the negative 3. Now for this one down here, I would absolutely use my calculator. And I want your answer in scientific notation. So you can get the answer and then transfer it, or you can say, hey, I want you, my calculator, to do this work for me. I'm going to put in scientific notation. And I'm going to go back where I came from, and I'm going to type that. I'm going to say 4.7. I'm going to use this times 10 to the n. So times 10 to the 6th. Close that parenthesis. Open a new one. 3.4 times 10. Remember to use the negative here. Negative 3. And this is what I was talking about. Make sure you move this down. Okay, and we'll press enter. And we'll get 1.598 times 10 to the 4. Now, if we were not in scientific notation mode and we were just in normal mode, okay, then we could enter the exact same thing again, and we would get 15,980, but it wanted it in scientific notation. So 1.51234 times 10 to the 4th. Okay, let's move on from scientific notation and let's talk about square roots. So the square root of a number is the number that if you square it, it gives the original number, okay? This is really confusing for a definition. It makes a lot more sense when you actually see it, okay? The square root of 25, we can mark it with this little thing called a radical, is this square root of 25. So what times itself gives you 25? Well, 5 times 5 is 25. So the square root of 25 is 5. Square root and squared, notice that they are related. We can do this on our calculator. Not everything's anywhere near a perfect root. So a lot of times our calculators are going to save us here. If you want the square root in our calculator, you need to look, see this little green piece up here? There's the radical. So to get to the green, you need to press second and press that square root button. And then simply type for ours 25. And it'll tell you, hey, your answer is 5. Okay. Now, if you ever get an answer in a square root term, it's no big deal. Just like before, to go between fraction and decimal, just press this back and forth button. Okay, this is a good time to pause. Give yourself a little bit of practice. I'm going to go ahead and work through it. So when you press play, you're good to go. Let's clear what we have. Let's open our radical. And let's see, 14 to the 3rd plus 19 squared is going to give us 55.72 roughly. For the next one down, we can have 34 to the 3rd minus 19 squared. Press enter. That's going to give us 197.34-ish. Now for our next one, let's see. we are going to have the square root of 34 minus 19 times 3 plus 2. When we press enter, it's going to yell at us. Tells us, hey, you have a domain error. That usually means in this class that you've put a negative somewhere that it can't be. So we say, okay, fine. Second quit, or you can just press enter. Press clear. This is an error because if we actually do this under here, we get 34 minus that 19 times 3 is first, and this is going to give us a negative number. So we end up with a square root of a negative number, and we cannot take a square root of a negative number because remember that a negative times a negative is always a positive. So we won't get a negative, at least in the real number system. Okay. And lastly, we have this beast. And this puts together, if you can do this one, you're in really good shape for this section. So make sure you can. I like to see these on tests, hint, hint. So first open your square root. Then you see a really ugly fraction. So I'm going to go into math print. And now it's really just a matter of typing. So 1.42 times 10 to the 4th. Okay. Minus 3.65 times 10 to the negative 3. And we'll move down to the bottom. We'll have 4.56 times 10 to the 6th. And then we'll have plus 5.75 times 10 to the negative 4. Again, if you get an error here, it's usually going to be a domain error or some other type of error. Double check. First of all, you could end up with a negative under here. That would be a problem. But usually you also, when you're playing with negatives, make sure you didn't accidentally use the subtraction. We all still do it, even math professors. And we'll press enter. And this is going to be roughly 0.056, depending where we round. Definitely get yourself some practice here. If you can do this one, you're in really good shape. You've got all the orders that we've talked about. There's one more thing that we want to talk about in our calculator, and it's mixed numbers and improper fractions. So a mixed number means you have a whole number and a fraction. So 1.5, 3 3/4, okay? You can actually enter that directly into our calculator. We're going to press the second button, and we're going to go to here. We want this big number with n over d. So if we want, we press second here, and it's going to set up a mixed number for us. So if we wanted 3.5, we just use the arrows to get where we want to be. So 3.5, when we press enter, it's going to say, hey, that's 7/2. Well, that is an improper fraction, which means the top is bigger than the bottom. Your numerator is larger than your denominator. Okay, that results in that mixed number. If you want the decimal, remember to press this conversion key and it'll say, hey, that's 3.5. So you can do it as a fraction there. You can get it out as a decimal. Okay. If we do the try it that's on our notes, it says to try to convert 5 2/3 into an improper fraction and then a decimal. So we'll say, okay, we want the mixed number. We want 5 2/3. The improper fraction is 17/3. And if we want the decimal, we'll press that right there. So we get 5.67. And lastly, we have 3 practice problems. This is a great place to pause, do it yourself, and then see if your answers agree. I'm going to clear this out. Open parentheses. We'll have 7.35 times 19 plus 35 minus 78, and close that, and we're going to raise all of that to the 0 power. Now, some of you didn't need to do any work here. Why? Because we raised it to the 0 power, and that is always going to give us 1. Okay? So if you did the work and you raised it to 0 and you saw 1, great. You might be like, oh, duh. And that's fine. No harm, no foul. The next one, we just want to be really careful with input. We want to say, okay, we're starting with 5,000. I'm going to open a parenthesis. I'm going to have 1 plus. I have a fraction. I have 0.05 on the top, 12 on the bottom. We're going to close that parenthesis, and we're going to raise all of that to the 12 times 5. Now, I did not put parentheses there, order of operations. It doesn't matter up at there at the top, okay? But you could absolutely put parentheses. I'll give you the same answer. You're going to get 6416.8. Okay, so just enter it exactly as you see it. That's the key to success in a lot of this first section. And lastly, we have a large fraction. When you see a fraction, that's the whole thing. I go ahead and set that up. So you have 50,000 on top. I think I added a 0 there. Let me. And then we'll open our parentheses and have 1 plus, and we'll have another fraction. We'll have 0.035 here. We'll have 365 here. I did not enter my parentheses. You can always go back and enter by doing second insert. I'll scroll back over here. We're going to close that parenthesis. And that is getting raised to the, we'll do parentheses this time, 365 times 10. And close those parentheses. Press enter. And we'll see that we get 35,234.996. These are not, these last two are not just random questions. We'll actually see those in, I believe it's unit 3, where we do compound interest and installment loans. If some of you are in business areas, you might start to notice some of those and where they might apply. Okay, that's all we have for this section. Took a little while longer than I thought, but hopefully you can get some good practice. Remember, there's tons more practice within your text. At the end of each section, you can get practice with assignments. You can get practice with these handouts. And if you need even more practice, let me know. I can point you in the right direction. Thanks for tuning in, and I'll see you next time.